Have you ever looked at the shattered pieces of your life and wondered if it is simply too late to start over? Maybe you have made a mistake that feels utterly unfixable, or perhaps life just didn't turn out the way you had so carefully planned. You might be lying awake in the dead of night, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the relentless ticking of the clock, and feeling the sheer weight of time slipping through your fingers. What if I told you that the God of the universe actually specializes in blank slates? What if the painful end of your current road is actually the exact place where God is preparing to do something entirely new? Picture the prophet Elijah. He has just experienced the absolute greatest spiritual victory of his entire life on Mount Carmel, boldly calling down fire from heaven. The scent of rain and consuming smoke was still lingering in his clothes. The deafening roar of the awestruck crowd was still echoing in his ears. But now, he is running for his life in sheer terror. The heavy dust of the wilderness coats his worn sandals. The blistering desert sun beats down mercilessly on his back, baking the cracked earth beneath his blistered feet. He collapses under the sparse shade of a solitary juniper tree, completely and utterly spent. The rough, dry bark presses against his weary shoulders. The silence around him is deafening, broken only by his own ragged breathing. He is terrified, drained of all hope, and deeply convinced that he has failed his mission. The crushing weight of it all presses down on his chest, and he actually prays for God to just take his life. He thinks his story is completely over. He thinks he has ruined everything, and that there is absolutely no coming back from this desolate wilderness. Maybe you have felt exactly what Elijah felt under that tree tonight. Perhaps you are sitting in the cold ashes of a dream that just didn't work out, or a marriage that fell apart, leaving behind empty rooms and echoing hallways. You might be looking at the cracked earth of your own circumstances, feeling the heavy, suffocating silence of a life that has suddenly lost its forward momentum. Perhaps you are standing in a quiet kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that has gone cold, paralyzed by the overwhelming sensation that your best days are permanently behind you. You feel dried up. You feel useless. You feel as though your spiritual, emotional, and physical reserves are entirely bankrupt. But look closely at what God does with Elijah in that barren wasteland. He doesn't strike him with lightning for his lack of faith. He doesn't shout at him to pull himself together. Instead, God meets him in the sensory reality of his exhaustion. He sends an angel with a freshly baked cake of bread, warm to the touch, and a cool, refreshing jar of water. He lets the prophet sleep, and then God guides him to a cave on Mount Horeb. God doesn't speak in the rock-shattering wind, or the violent earthquake, or the blazing fire. He speaks in a still, small voice, a gentle whisper that rustles the air at the mouth of the cave. In that quiet whisper, God gives Elijah a brand new assignment. He gives him a blank slate. Or consider Moses. Picture a man who was once a glittering prince of Egypt, draped in fine linens, walking through marble palaces polished to a mirror shine, surrounded by the intoxicating scent of exotic spices and absolute power. But in a moment of rash anger, he takes a life. He completely derails his own destiny. Moses flees for his life into the punishing, unforgiving heat of the Midianite desert. For 40 long years, Moses lives in absolute obscurity. The man who once commanded armies is now herding stubborn sheep across rocky, barren hillsides. Feel the grit of the coarse sand blowing against his weathered, leathery skin. Smell the pungent, dusty odor of the sheep he tends day in and day out. For 40 years, the blistering wind strips away his royal identity until he is nothing but a forgotten fugitive. Moses was 80 years old. By every human metric, his story was over. The ink had dried. The book was closed. Perhaps you feel like you are wandering in the backside of your own desert right now. Maybe you made a catastrophic choice years ago, and you have sentenced yourself to a lifetime of quiet exile. You look at the mundane, dusty routine of your daily life and think, this is it. This is all I get. I had my chance. I blew it. And now I just have to live with the consequences. You might be carrying the heavy, invisible stones of regret, replaying that one fateful decision over and over in your mind until the guilt makes it hard to breathe. But then, out of nowhere, a bush catches fire. Moses stares at the brilliant, golden-orange flames dancing wildly on the brittle branches. He hears the violent crackle of the heat, yet he sees that the green leaves are not curling. The wood is not turning to ash. The bush is burning, but it is not consumed. And from the center of that impossible fire, the voice of the Almighty calls his name, Moses, Moses. God tells him to take off his sandals, and as Moses stands there, feeling the coarse, warm sand beneath his bare feet, God gives him a brand new calling. God looks at an 80-year-old washed-up murderer and says, I am sending you to Pharaoh. God didn't just forgive Moses' past, he completely rewrote his future. He handed him a blank slate. If you are struggling to believe this could be true for you, look at the story of Peter in the New Testament. Peter was the rock. He was the disciple who boldly declared he would gladly die for Jesus, even if everyone else abandoned him. But fast forward to the courtyard of the high priest on the night of Jesus' arrest. The air is bitterly cold, biting at Peter's face. He is huddling near a charcoal fire lit by the temple guards, desperate to soak up its meager warmth. The sharp smell of the burning wood fills his nostrils. And there, driven by sheer, blinding panic, Peter denies even knowing Jesus. Not once, but 3 times. Suddenly, the piercing, shrill crow of a rooster cuts through the pre-dawn stillness. It is a sound that hits Peter like a physical blow to the stomach. The Gospel of Luke tells us that at that exact moment, Jesus turns and looks straight at Peter. Their eyes meet through the flickering shadows of the courtyard. The realization of what he has done crashes over Peter like a tidal wave. He runs out into the dark, cobblestone streets, his chest heaving, his vision blurred with hot, stinging tears. Taste the bitter salt of his absolute devastation. He hasn't just failed. He has betrayed the best friend he ever had. He has compromised his deepest convictions. Maybe you know the bitter taste of those tears. Perhaps you are standing by your own charcoal fire of regret, smelling the smoke of a compromised conscience. You may have spoken cruel words to someone you love, words that shattered a relationship, and now you can't figure out how to take them back. You might have fallen back into a destructive habit or an addiction you swore you had conquered, and the shame is so thick you can barely lift your head. You look in the mirror and you don't even recognize the person staring back at you. You feel disqualified from grace, convinced that your failure is the final word of your story. But God's grace is not fragile, and His plans are not easily thwarted. After the resurrection, Jesus goes out of His way to find Peter. Picture the scene on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. The early morning mist is still hovering over the cool, dark water. The gentle, rhythmic sound of waves lapping against the pebbled shore fills the quiet air. Jesus has built another fire, a new charcoal fire. But this fire isn't a place of denial. It is a place of provision. The rich, Savory aroma of roasting fish and baking bread drifts across the beach, inviting the exhausted disciples to come and rest. Jesus pulls Peter aside. He doesn't demand an apology. He doesn't berate him for his cowardice in the courtyard. Instead, looking at Peter with eyes full of bottomless, unmerited grace, Jesus simply asks, "Do you love me?" 3 times Peter denied him, and 3 times Jesus gives him the opportunity to affirm his love. With every "feed my sheep," Jesus is meticulously wiping the slate clean. He is lifting the heavy, suffocating cloak of shame off Peter's shoulders and replacing it with a mantle of purpose. Peter's greatest failure became the very foundation of his deepest transformation. What if the exact same thing is true for you right now? What if the shattered pieces of your life are not trash to be swept away, but the very raw materials God wants to use to build a masterpiece? The master potter does not throw away the clay when it becomes marred on the wheel. He presses his strong, loving hands into the mess. He feels the lumps, the imperfections, and the brokenness. And with gentle, deliberate pressure, he shapes it into a brand new vessel. You do not have to stay under the juniper tree. You do not have to wander in the desert of your past mistakes for the rest of your life. You do not have to stand weeping in the dark courtyard of your deepest regrets. The God of Elijah, the God of Moses, and the God of Peter is looking at you right now. He sees every tear. He knows every failure, and he understands every ounce of your exhaustion. But he is not finished with you. Perhaps right now, you can almost smell the roasting fish on the shore of your own new beginning. Perhaps you can hear the still, small voice whispering through the chaos of your mind, calling you by name. Breathe in that grace. Let the heavy, suffocating silence be broken by the voice of the Creator saying, "Behold, I make all things new." It is not too late. You have not ruined the master plan. Step out of the ashes, open your empty hands, and receive the beautiful, terrifying, glorious gift of a blank slate. Your story is far from over. In fact, the best chapter is just about to begin.